What's up, everybody? It's your boy Montoya Smith, aka Black Socrates, as we are bringing you another episode of Politically Conscious. This is actually episode 72. My brother Emil has been on with me probably 71 out of 72, or at least 70 out of 72. And so, thank you, brother, for holding me down. We are looking for our brother Leo Smith as well. But while we're looking for Leo, I'm gonna go ahead and introduce you, Emil. I am the moderator for this show. We try to bring you politics without propaganda. That is our focus if you are a first-time watcher. And so my brother Emil, I have him representing the left of things. And so I'll let him tell you a little bit about himself as a political consultant, but he serves as one of our experts on this show as we break down political propaganda so you, the voter, can have the truth. Go ahead, brother Emil.
Hey, this is Emil Bryant. I am an author and political consultant. When a candidate comes to me, I'm going to test them. And the reason why I'm testing them is because I'm tired of candidates not doing the one thing voters need most, which is tell the truth. You tell it early, you tell it often. Bad news does not get better with time. If you're going to run to represent the people, tell the people what they need to make an informed and intelligent decision. Otherwise, you may as well just be like everybody else. Tell the truth, tell it early, tell it often.
No, I really appreciate that. And so what we do, we specialize in actually looking at clips from around the internet and discussing in reference to the current politics. And so the big news in politics right now has been the Voters' Right Act. We talked about it on episode 71. And I think based on what I'm seeing now, we still need to continue that conversation. And that's why I actually entitled this show, Emil, The Voters' Right Act, What Now? On the last show, you were on here with us with the Shelley Winters, and at one point, as we were dialoguing and actually starting to enter talk about some of the history, Shelley kind of challenged us and says, "Well, what are you going to do now?" And so we're at that point. The basically Voters' Right Act is gutted from our perspective when it comes to the collective Black vote. Has been gutted because no longer you can necessarily basically it allows for discrimination by race is the way I state it, but I'll be asked you, if you will, just for our watchers, how do I legally state what exactly happened inside of the Voters' Right? Again, you are the expert here, so I just simply said it allows for the discrimination via race. That's probably not the proper terms legally. So, Emil, if you will, share what exactly happened for those who are maybe haven't heard the specifics of what happened inside of what the Supreme Court's decision was. Go ahead, brother.
Yeah, so what the Supreme Court said was really kind of, it took a very strategic scalpel to the Voting Rights Act. And that's the thing that I think most people understand. First of all, the decision was Louisiana versus Calais. And what they did when they took the scalpel to it is they made it harder to challenge electoral maps, because instead of it looking at the outcome of an electoral map, i.e. how the districts are drawn, looking at the Voting Rights Act as it was written in 1965, and oh, by the way, was as recently as the George W. Bush administration reauthorized with a unanimous vote. Both parties, 98-0 was the last time it was voted unanimously. And there was another vote since then, but I wanted to say that because nobody had a problem with what the Voting Rights Act had until the very recent memory, when the Supreme Court just a week ago, 10 days ago, said it's the intent for racial gerrymandering. It's the intent, not the product of the district drawing. It's the intent. So it was easy to test the outcome. I can see with my own two eyes, you put all these people in a block, or you broke a voting block up very specifically to remove the ability of that voting block to protect its interests by voting a representative from that interested area or group. Now it's intent. And that's why it was a scalpel, because all they had to do was change the wording slightly or remove some of the wording slightly, and the entire thing fell apart. The Voting Rights Act was very carefully constructed in 1965. It wasn't written in 1965. It was passed and signed into law by President Johnson in 1965. It took years and several different Civil Rights Act to get there from here. People don't talk about the Civil Rights Act of 1957, which President Lyndon B. Johnson, when he was a senator, with the
Hold on one second.
Sure.
Emil, I think you may have said something wrong. Let me see, just make sure, because I want to make sure I'm following you. You said it wasn't passed until Johnson in 1965, and then you're kind of going back from there. Did you mean to say it was something was passed before that? Because the timeline seems to be off. Or at least I'm not understanding you then. I want to. If I'm misunderstanding you, I think I may just have misheard something. So I want to make sure I'm following your timeline. Because go ahead. I feel like I missed something because seemed like you went backwards from a point where you were saying this wasn't done to this point, and then it seemed like you went backwards.
Right. All right. So let me be very clear. In 1965, the Voting Rights Act was passed.
Right.
It was very important to understand who the president was at that time. It was Lyndon B. Johnson.
Right.
Right. Lyndon B. Johnson did something very significant prior to him being president in 1957. It's a little known, very little talked about Civil Rights Act from 1957. He was a senator and he whipped the votes that got that passed and put on President Eisenhower's desk. That act is one of the main reasons why we got the Voting Rights Act. People were very upset with President Eisenhower in 1957 because it was a very diluted Civil Rights Act. President Eisenhower was an incrementalist. He said, you can't do it all at once. So Senator Johnson, who whipped the votes for that, never forgot that act wasn't enough.
Okay.
So he was an advocate for more civil rights legislation throughout his time as a senator and then as vice president to President Kennedy. So there was this long-standing force within. I know people say President LBJ was a racist, and I do not doubt that by the numbers. But when it came to civil rights, he was an advocate. And he's a very complex man, and people can go into his biographies to find that out. But during those 8 years, that Civil Rights Act was brewing. It was constantly being iterated and updated. And finally, the version we know got passed in 1965, and he as president signed it.
Okay.
That's really significant because as the language in it was really specific and very carefully crafted, and that's why it lasted for so long and had such support throughout almost all of its time as a law since 1965. That's the part that I think is missing from the conversation. It wasn't just willy-nilly, here's an act and was shoved down people's throats. These civil rights acts, the one in 1965 and the Housing Discrimination Act 1968, the Civil Rights Act 1964, these acts were all compounded through time since 1866, the very first Civil Rights Act. And they were always written with more and more care to try to get the rights of to protect the rights of Black voters, specifically Black citizens. So this change was also done with just as much care because they were trying to deconstruct a very specific element of that, which pushed down a whole row of dominoes. And that's what you saw afterward when Louisiana, Alabama, and several other Tennessee and several states in the old Confederacy began to change their districting simply by that one ruling, going from outcome to intent.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, Leo, thanks for joining us today. And so I basically had Emil just kind of breaking down for those through all the hoopla and all the hysteria around the Voters' Rights Act. I wanted Emil, as the historian as he is when it comes to politics, I wanted him to break down specifically so that our watchers, again, we're trying to raise the consciousness. That's why we call ourselves politically conscious. And so we wanted to make sure they specifically understood exactly what that change was. And I would say in layman's terms, people probably have heard it this way, but at the end of the day, the reason it was written towards outcome is because it covered whether the intent was there or not. So that's why that was very specific to the Civil Rights Act. And because at the end of the day, how can you really ever determine intent? And so now and people have probably heard this. Now, what they did, but with the scalpel, as Emil says, the Supreme Court changing their ruling on this particular point, it now, for the most part, you can hide your intent by just saying, I wasn't going after race. It was just, I wanted people to vote within my district. Leo, any thoughts on, I know you kind of caught in on the tail end, but is there anything you want to add to just making sure our watchers are understanding what happened with this decision?
Yeah, I know that Emil did a very good and accurate history piece there. And I just want to highlight a couple of pieces I'm sure he covered. One, I think we have to go back as if we really want to understand this and then develop a plan of attack to defend representation in a democracy by all people. And I'm not just talking about Black people, but, 14th Amendment, right? Post-Reconstruction. And I think you mentioned something about 1866. 1868 was the 14th Amendment, right? So that granted citizenship, equal protection, and due process to the freed descendants of slaves, or freed slaves in this case. The 15th Amendment, of course, prohibited racial discrimination based on race. All right, so I'm probably saying some of the same things, but I just want to kind of highlight some of the things I'm sure he addressed just to make sure we understand what this fight is about. So this fight is about what Emil talked about, the 1960s Civil Rights Acts, right? Versus the 1860 Civil Rights Acts. So what the Supreme Court has done, and I think people that they were doing this for a long time, pre-affirmative action. Montoya, you've heard me say, we need to have people who can intellectually make reason, currently based arguments on whether or not these laws should exist. So what the Supreme Court is arguing, Roberts is arguing, Amy Coney Barrett on the Supreme Court, she's sensitive to this argument, but she's more willing to side with, we still need these laws. But what Roberts and others and the more conservative people there being pushed by the political zeitgeist of this cultural war time is Black people are doing great. They're voting in great numbers. We have record voting in Georgia. We have record voting in South Carolina. So obviously Black people are not being impeded based on their race. And any defense of Black people who vote 95% Democrat, any defense of them is a partisan defense. So they're saying, Democrats, you are making a partisan defense for this, not a race-based defense. That's actually what they're saying. And the court has now agreed with them. And the question becomes, can we now go back to the 14th or 15th Amendment and say those are enough? Because the restorative justice based on racial discrimination by the Jim Crow South no longer needed because that discrimination is no longer happening. And then the second question becomes, if you're saying that the discrimination is because Black people may not have people who look like them, then that's a new debate. So that debate is it required that a person be Black in order to give just and true representation of a Black?
And that's what
I want you to understand what the argument is.
No, absolutely. These are brilliant discussions. This is what we do, right? And so here's a clip from Shelley. From his actual show that he just put up a couple, like maybe yesterday. I wanted to kind of just start here as we massage through this conversation. Again, we're not just trying to share propaganda with you. We're trying to get and cut through on this thing. So again, this is about a 3-minute clip just for everybody watching. But there's a lot said here, and I just want to start here. And Emil, we'll get your response to this first.
Action, all of these things. It's now to the point where, like, hey, look, I'm tired. I'm not doing this anymore. And that's where we are. Listen to this exchange between Bakari Sellers and Kevin O'Leary on CNN. And this is the proof that where we are is where we are.
In Congress. I think everybody should take confidence in the fact the Supreme Court basically supported one vote, one person, guaranteed in perpetuity. And the rest is just map wars. And I think we should get used to it. And I think it's, as you said, a state-based situation. Add this to the mix. At the end of the day, the state decides at the state level. It's in the Constitution. Get over it.
So the problem with that sentiment is that you were born in 1954.
Yeah.
Okay, you're
Very popular.
You're 71.
Yeah.
Right. In 1954,
by the way, I'm a vampire.
During your lifetime, we've actually had Brown v. Board of Education.
I remember.
Yeah, Brown v. Board of Education. I don't know how you remember it. I think you were like 2 months old. But I'm not finished yet. Let me finish my thought.
Drill back to 54.
Yeah, because you're still alive, right? And so there's an entire generation of people. Brown v. Board, it overturned Plessy v. Ferguson of 1896. My point is that my mother was born in 1951. She desegregated schools. My father was shot in the civil rights movement. Those people. I'm going to finish because you're being utterly disrespectful.
Not at all.
So I'm going to finish this comment. So what I'm telling you is that there are people in this country who fought, died, and bled for the right to vote. Don't be a just understand.
Okay. Bakari,
just understand.
I'm pointing something out to you. The Constitution is being upheld. Do you have a problem with that? Do you have a problem with the Constitution of the United States of America?
Bakari, I'm gonna stop you.
So this is Bakari Sellers is running down, the history. People bled and died, which is true. My mom desegregated schools. My mom, not my grandmother, not my great-grandmother. My mom desegregated schools in South Carolina. My dad, not my granddad, not my uncle, not my way back 3 generations before, but my dad himself got shot trying to integrate businesses and protesting in South Carolina. His dad got shot. So he's leaning on the history, right? And he's telling Kevin O'Leary, who's saying, hey, look, it's the Constitution, keep it moving. It's a map war. That's it. And it's very nonchalant. And Bakari is leaning on this emotional, like, hey, you don't understand. You're still here, but you don't understand. There are people still here who fought and died. Well, not the people who fought and died are still here, but you don't understand what I mean. He fought and bled. And Kevin O'Leary's basically saying, and he said, don't be a man's appendage, but that's what Bakari Sellers said to Kevin O'Leary. But I understood it because I understood not what Bakari was saying, but I understood the frustration on his part because he's trying to lean on what has worked for decades. This idea that we fought and people fought and died for the right to vote. And Kevin O'Leary is saying you still have the right to vote. We're just paying attention to the Constitution. Keep it moving. White guilt is dead in America, and the Bakari Sellers and the talented 10th and the top boule class and the bourgeois class have to learn to deal with this new world. Because no one really cares anymore about your mom and your dad and the fighting and the dying and the marching and the protesting. They're saying,
Okay.
You're on mute, brother.
Am I on mute? Or Montoya's on mute?
Leo, yep, I'm on mute. Leo, I'll let
Yeah,
you
look,
talk.
I oftentimes, sometimes disagree with Shelley because that's the beauty of Shelley. Sometimes he's spot on, sometimes he's performing for his show. That's an element right there. And I've been warning civil rights leaders for a long time. Hey, the Constitution doesn't care about the blood loss. It doesn't know. It's not a living being. And the other people who are being strict constitutionalists, they don't care about the romance or the waxing about the history of Bloody Sunday and da-da-da-da. They don't care. And as long as Democrats, especially Black Democrats, but even white Democrats, because white Democrats follow Black Democrats' leads. As long as they keep saying stuff about, but lives were lost and blood was lost, and think that's a strategy to make people who are using the Constitution for mapping for power. You think telling someone that your great granddad had to fight, I have the same history as Bakari. Okay, I'm 62 years old. I was born in 1964. So that means that when I was born, my mother didn't have full voting rights. So I can tell the same stories that Bakari's telling. But that story is not a reason. That's emotion. And that's all it is.
Emil, your thoughts?
The whole reason they attacked the Civil Rights Act or the Voting Rights Act is emotion. And I fundamentally disagree that it's emotion that we are relying on. As if there was no emotion. Hold on, Leo. If there was no emotion on the other side.
Hold on, Emil. Hold on. I'm doing this. go ahead and because I want him to. Go ahead and make that quick response.
Well, I mean, I want Emil to say more about why you say their attack is emotional. It's structural, but go ahead. You tell me why it's emotional.
Okay, so Leo, I hate doing this, but I gotta just give me a minute, Montoya, because I gotta walk through three things.
Okay.
The Civil Rights Act of 1866 very clearly said anybody who's considered a citizen has the same rights as a white man. That it says it very clearly in the text. We should have no more civil rights laws after that. So clearly that law wasn't enough. So then we have a raft of civil rights legislation that culminates in the Voting Rights Act in 1965. That act was reauthorized in 2006, 98-0 in the Senate. I think it was like 330 or 313 to 30 in the House. So overwhelming support from both parties to reauthorize the act just 20 years ago. That act was reauthorized for 25 years. So what structurally happened between 2006 and 2026 that made such a significant difference to the Republicans, they had to attack it before it expired in 2031. This is really something that we have to talk about if we want to talk about emotion on our side of the equation, because they emotionally, structurally attacked it before it was expired. And oh, by the way, if we really want to talk about it, we have to go back to the first Civil Rights Act, the one that predates the 14th Amendment, and ask, why wasn't that enough? Because clearly, if it's not enough once, if the law of the land wasn't enough one time, every other time we had to do something, it was based on something not the law. It was based on something not a logical, structural reason. And if that's true, which I believe it is, because that law from 1866 is clear as day, it simply means that we're dealing with people's emotions because there's a backlash that Black people have to weather every single time we make a structural advancement in this nation. And that advancement is not emotional. That
so let me jump in real quick. And I would listen after listening to you, Emil. I think you're erroneously applying emotion to your analysis, meaning it is structural. You even said structural, and the logic of it is based on what the outcome they want it to be. So it has been very structural.
Why do they want that outcome, Montoya? So, Why do they want that outcome, Montoya?
We're all politically conscious. So
no, that's what I'm saying. Why? What is their motivation for that outcome?
Okay, so even though here we go. I'm gonna answer you. I don't have a problem answering you. So in the very first, when the amendments get put in place, they get put into place when we have quote unquote half the country that lost the war at the time. I'm not silly enough to think that the structural reasons is not related to the reasons why they didn't want that act in place. But what they have done, and what has happened up until this point has been a very, how do we use power? How do we undermine it? Now, what they were able to do after Reconstruction and the military left in the South, they were able to undermine it based on the codes and the Black laws, right? They were able to undermine.
I'm still listening for the motivation. Why did they do this?
Right. Here it is. So that is not necessarily emotional. If you think someone's less than you, or you don't want them to have power, that's not necessarily emotional.
Your language is all trying emotional. To equate want, think. Those are all emotional words.
Okay. But I don't want to make out the dialogue today about what emotions is when I'm saying. So they take let me let you have your word emotion. So they took their emotions and then basically politically used the system. What I feel like Leo is highlighting, and I think we have to be aware of, is how to take our emotions and now use the system. Whereas I want to make sure we both agree that both sides are acting. I don't want to hang on emotion
because it's not just us. It's not just we're reacting to something that they're reacting to because the structure changed, the power structure changed.
Let me. So I want to make this a little more clear. I don't agree. I don't agree that both sides are acting with emotion. Because if both sides were acting with emotion, then they would have taken. See, so I think Democrats and progressives, liberals are acting literally with emotion, acting with emotion. I think the Republicans, if we're going to say that they had emotional reasons for doing it, but then they acted with law, with strategy, with stacking the Supreme Court, with spending billions of dollars on attacking districts. Okay, see now, if Obama and the Democrat coalition were so emotionally distraught, they could have structurally told Ruth Bader Ginsburg to get your A off the Supreme Court and stop playing this white feminist thing so that we can make sure the Supreme Court protects our rights. If Democrats were so committed, right? I know I don't, because I know you're a reasonable man, but that's kind of what we're saying here. Right. Republicans transcend their emotions to gain power. What Bakari did in that clip that Shelley was playing, he used pure emotion to try and make a rationalization to keep a whole law. And the Republicans saying, we ain't hearing that no more. So what you're pointing out, Emil, is that the federal government used to be sympathetic to the laws that were being broke by the South. So the South said, F the 14th and the 15th, right? We're going to do things differently. So the federal government goes, we got to do 1964 Voting Rights Act because the South is not complying. They're willing to break the law. Now the federal government is unsympathetic.
That's so you got to have the dialogue from that landscape.
So what people to have that dialogue. But right. there's a
But Bakari isn't, Stacey Abrams isn't, and da-da-da. So your leaders, even Mr. put on a t-shirt talking about this is war. Hakeem Jeffries last week. Y'all saw the t-shirt he put on? This is war, blah, 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 blah. Well, he's trying to now do big stick politics. But you know what he then said? We're putting up a 6-figure effort to fight against this. 6 figures, Bakari? That's mosquito dick shit. Excuse me.
No, it's
the Republicans have spent billions of dollars to do this. And you stand up and perform. I mean, I'm sorry, I cursed on your show. It's just because it's maddening to me.
We know, I love it. Let me say, Emil, let me say this. Here it is. Here's what I want. Here's what I was gonna say anyway. So here's my perspective as the layman here. You guys are the expert. But again, just trying to watch and bring as much to the show as I can. And so here's been my perspective as I watched this play out, and I wanted to get both of y'all responses to this. So I would offer for if we consider the scalping, and I love that word, Emil, how they scalp this from outcome to intent. So if we consider that as somewhat of an attack to, if you will, black representation, because that's how this is being couched. And that's what it is. I don't mind calling it that. But here's what I thought about. At the end of the day, have we as a community got a little comfortable and we were asleep at the wheel? And here's my dialogue to y'all. I'm talking about culturally, and I'm talking about for those who have a opportunity to be more politically involved, more political, because at the end of the day, I don't want to go off track. So sleep at the wheel to the point where now that the billions of dollars that Leo just spoke about has played out effectively, and they took advantage of this period, this point in time to do this. And it was, I do agree with Leo, done very structurally, very strategically. Now that it's happening, the response I would offer is still emotional to the point of, look what they did. We were asleep at the wheel because we were comfortable. Any thoughts from either one of you? And I'm gonna play another cut.
You will get no argument from me on that, Montoya. In fact, one of the challenges I've said this from my perspective for many, many decades now. There's a problem in that we've been lulled into complacency because things were okay. They weren't great, but they were far better than they were for our parents, right? We can say that unequivocally. They were far better than it were for our parents. So then the question was, and this is where you see the striation in our politics. Black people's politics are now very much different than they were. We were much more monolithic 60 years ago than we are today. You have people who say, Black people who say, I'm voting for Trump because look at how I did under Trump. I made more money. I had less taxes, blah, 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 without any regard to the downstream effect of what Trump does to people who don't have that kind of pocketbook or pocket change. And that's just one striation. There are other striations socially that are also prevalent in our community that weren't as prevalent many years ago. We always had a striation. We always had lots of different levels within Black society, but the distribution of the types of voters that we have is much broader than it used to be. It used to be very narrow, and now it's a much broader. Same striations, different distribution of voters. Now, what I would say to every Black leader is, you are not doing your homework. You haven't done your homework for the past 20 plus years. And what I mean is, I'm going to bring up a controversial figure in the name of Lewis Powell, who wrote in 1971, who was a Supreme Court justice, a very specific document that articulated everything we're seeing happen in the last 30 years. He was very blunt and very clear as to how to disenfranchise Black people without removing the vote. And if you follow that letter that he wrote back in 1971, it is as prescient as a letter from that era could ever be. He wrote the blueprint for them, and they've executed that blueprint. So the question we're going to have to answer, Montoya, to your point, where is our blueprint? Where is our change to our strategy, operations, and tactics to counter what is obviously a seething undercurrent and now overcurrent of, we don't want you here and we don't like the way you do things because of who you are. And we can play with the language all we want to, because that's what they do. They say, oh, well, they're Democrats. If we were Republicans, they would probably find a way to do it, because that's just how much emotion is on their side. But to your point, it is attached to a very brilliant strategy that took 3 decades to execute.
And so I actually talked, which I don't talk politics too much on the actual mental dialogue perspective, which I do pop-up shows, actually, because this is so prevalent and coming into our discussions. I actually talked about politics on my show this past Saturday. And so it's more about the understanding of what has happened. Right. And so, but this is the type of things we're seeing. I want to hear y'all response to this, but this is these are the type of things we're seeing. And I'm like, okay, if this is the new reality, how do we actually act versus react? Well, this clip right here is an example of reaction to me, because something that I said on that show that I wanted to bring to the table here is, and you've heard me say this before, Mill, I may have said it on Politically Conscious before. I don't think not only have we not done our homework, but we've never properly put in context what exactly our ancestors did politically. And because we've never understood it and learned it properly, I felt like our biggest mistake as a culture when it comes to politics is we have not began to operate on what our ancestors had already got us. Had we understood what they actually worked to get us, we wouldn't continue to do politics the way we've done them. We've done politics as if we're still in that time.
Correct.
I consider what our ancestors did to be a step. So the second step would require now understanding the system and playing the game that's available to you. They had to make coalitions to play the game, just to like you said, to y'all point. The amendments, the 14th, 15th Amendment, that should have been enough. But we're not in a shoulda, coulda world. That's why we had to do we're not in that. So they strategically got the act put in place, since the actual law itself would not stand alone because of the country we had. Like, we don't have to reiterate that 1,000 times. However, once those acts got put in place, I feel like we've done politics almost as if they have not.
Well, see, I'm gonna piggyback on you real quick, or cipher, as they would say in hip hop. I'm the cipher here to me is there's a broken chain between that generation's politics and the current generation's politics. And that broken chain there's many reasons why that broke. There's a lot of trauma from that era that people just didn't want to address. That's PTSD from lots of people. That's part of it. Part of it is things like COINTELPRO. That's part of it. Part of it is that the changing mores and social values of our nation. That's part of it. All the opportunities to Black people for education and economic opportunities change. That's part of it. When you start accumulating all of these little nicks to the chain, you see the chain break at some point. And it broke I'd say in the 80s primarily, but we can go all the way to the 90s. The question we're going to have to answer is now, you have unequivocal proof that you have an enemy. You have unequivocal proof that they will hide behind everything they've hidden before to try to disenfranchise you, or at least minimize your ability to act on your own behalf. They're going to continue to do that until you either submit or change tactics. And one of the things we're going to have to learn from our ancestors that I think is missing in the conversation, and this is something that Leo is brilliant about doing, is, are you willing to put the work in to change policy incrementally but consistently? Because Leo goes in and brings
let me jump to these clips.
And that's the thing that I think is missing.
I love what you're saying. The only thing I will challenge you on what you said was, ain't no hiding no more, and that's cool.
No, I said
I don't understand why an athlete would go to a school where the state is ushering in a new iteration of Jim Crow. Mothers and fathers of those athletes, because if you're a 4 or 5-star athlete, you can get NIL money anyway. You don't need to go there. If it was up to the southern states, they would still be having slave labor, which is what they used athletics for. If athletes stopped going to the Tennessees and the Louisiana, the top tier athletes, ESPN and presidents of schools, chambers of commerce would start having conversations.
D.L. Hughley framed the question perfectly. What if Black college athletes refuse to sign to schools in states that gerrymandered districts to exclude Black representation? I'm Major League, and I'll give you 3 things about it. Thing number 1, these states are taking 2 things from Black people at the same time. They're taking your vote and they're taking your labor. Specifically, these SEC schools in Alabama, Tennessee, and Georgia. The Supreme Court has given these states the green light to gut political power, and they are breaking their necks to wipe Black districts off the map. And yet the premier universities in these states are lining up to profit off of Black athletes, pack their stadiums, sell jerseys with the names of your sons and daughters on the back. They want Black bodies on the field. They don't want you at the ballot box. That's the deal they're offering you. You need to stop taking it. Thing number 2, the Supreme Court permanently gutted the Voting Rights Act, and Republican-controlled states are moving fast to redraw maps and strip Black districts of representation. It's an all-hands-on-deck approach to block Black voters out of the democratic process. And it worked. But now, athletes have NIL money, real choices. And here's the thing. You don't have to send your kid to the University of Tennessee or Alabama. HBCUs exist. Grambling, Southern, Alabama A&M, schools where your talent builds Black institutions instead of enriching the same states working to erase Black political power.
I think we have to be clear that the only time they like Black bodies are when they're entertaining them or when they're on a sports field or a basketball court. That's the only value they see to Black bodies, not in positions of political power, not in positions of economic power. And so we have to have a multi-pronged strategy. We have a legal strategy. We need a strategy that shuts the streets down, but we also need a strategy of economic withdrawal.
Thing number 3, SEC programs pull in serious revenue, hundreds of millions of dollars annually. If Black athletes start redirecting their talent towards HBCUs and away from states suppressing Black votes, gerrymandering suddenly has a price tag. HBCUs in those states are the alternative. That's the move. Black economic power used strategically has always been one of our strongest tools. The leverage is there. The only question is whether our community has the solidarity to use that leverage. But I want to know what you think. Drop your thoughts in the comments and follow Major League TV on all platforms. And if you want to support my content directly, click the link in my bio and buy your boy a cup of coffee.
So I want to scaffold through that if I can with you guys.
That's a lot.
Yes, a lot. I want to scaffold through it. I see an effort at coming up with a strategy per se, but I want to lean into what I said before I started that video. that I approach often as if we hadn't reached the first step. We've never understood, in my opinion, what our ancestors actually got us. And so while there is some strategy in that approach, he had a three-pronged approach and talked about it these various ways. And I'm not being dismissive of him thinking through it. However, again, if my baseline is we've already gotten the first step, and some people will say, well, did we even desire the first step? I want to take that off the table. We already gotten the first step. So what happens is those strategies are as if, oh, this was taken away. So we're trying to start over and not understanding the baseline. So let me kind of get through it quickly. So what happens is the DL Hughley, Ryan Clark, whom I respect, he said, hey, maybe the athlete shouldn't go to these. He also said the same thing DL Hughley said. Ryan Clark said it. That was on the promotions for today, that the athlete shouldn't go to these schools where this gerrymandering stuff is taking place. When we were asleep at the wheel, as I already mentioned, it's not right to put that on the youth. It's not right. It's not right to put that on the youth who have the opportunities they have because of what our ancestors already got us. So to
and
now,
in fact,
go ahead, yo.
Yeah, and the fact is, two rich guys are saying that a poor kid playing football in Alabama, parents living, or mama, needing a house, basically living in a lean-to, that an HBCU is going to give them more money than the Alabama. That is BS. It doesn't even work that way. It just shows that these guys also, now I like the impulse, the intent. I like it. I agree with you, Montoya. At least we're talking about strategy now. And I can work on this and massage this, people politically understanding. We can partner with people like them. I used to be involved with a group called Athletes in Action. For a while, they were actually trying to do real structural work. Then they started being performative. They got too progressive. They didn't want to work with a black Republican. They got stupid, basically. And then they started losing their traction. But if we can get them to understand how NIL works, NIL is market driven. So they're wrong. If I tell my daughter to leave Southern Cal as a D1 track athlete, and all the money that she's getting there, and she ends up going to Grambling, she's going to lose a lot of money. And there's no way to fix that, Mr. Hughley. I'm sorry. So you're asking a black kid, as Montoya says. Now, the better strategy is, how can you set up an NIL collective that negotiates for that kid with that value in there about, we're going to ask for more from an SEC school. We're going to run a political campaign messaging against students deciding that, so that if a kid is able and we can collectively. When I ran Southern Kings basketball, our goal was to take 4 of our blue chip athletes and put them all in one school at the same time.
Oh, wow.
Because then you don't end up with a black kid sacrificing his ability to maximize the economic benefit of his talent, because he's a wide receiver. He goes to Southern, and then there's nobody who can throw him the ball. And so therefore his talent gets underlooked. So you got to cluster when you do this. In other words, there's ways to make this strategically more valuable, but I think it's the right move. And I think you really could sway the SEC schools that are doing this crap. Georgia's not doing it yet, but they probably will. We're doing a special session mid-June. Keep your ears open. Just heard about that this morning. But Alabama's doing it. I already told my kids before, hey, I did this before the voting rights stuff. You're not going to an SEC school unless you have to. That's what I told my kids when they were in elementary school. Georgia will offer both my kids full rides and money, but I wouldn't let them go to school there because they still got restaurants in the area that have coon burgers on the sign. Sorry. I mean, if you have the option, and I'm privileged enough that my kids have the option, yes, you should not go to those schools if it actually is spitting in your face about your values. But DL Hughley and the other gentleman who played professional football, they got to be sensitive to the fact that these kids, you're not just because it's an NIL, it's better, But you don't get the same money in a small market at a small school than you're going to get by being in a big market at Notre Dame.
Yeah, and here's the thing. One thing you said, Emil, and I just want to be real clear about it. I almost said it when you talked about it. But again, here's another thing that we don't understand in the context of history. The day the Civil Rights Act was passed, or it might be wrong. It's either 64 or 65. When do you remember when the Watts riot was?
65.
So it's 50. Okay, so that would have been the actual Voting Rights Act then, right? Because the civil. So right after the Voting Rights Act was passed, the Watts riot was the next day. The reason I'm pointing out that real context of history is we do have this concept that we were monolithically together in the 60s. The reality is for all groups, the top 10 to 20% actually moves the group, and that's what's remembered in history. That's all groups. It's not just Black people, but and so so if the voting rights and the civil rights was what it was, you don't have a Watts riot, which lets you know that those things were not effectively affecting those Black people out west at the time to where they thought it was relevant to their lives. You wouldn't have a riot the next day. You would have a celebration if we were a monolith like we think we were. Like, just one more little history lesson. So when MLK goes out to California for the first time and does the speech, the whole group boos him. They didn't want to have nothing to do with MLK. And it wasn't too long after going to LA and what he experienced in Chicago that he says to, I think it was either Andrew Young or Sidney Poitier. I forget, not Sidney Poitier, the light-skinned guy. I forget which one, but I think it was Young that he said it to. That he realized that's what started him even thinking about the poor man's campaign, because what he said to Andrew Young was, "Man, I've been fighting for thinking that this dignity would be what we needed." Because he's going by the Southern experience. But in the Southern experience in 1940, if a white person walked down the sidewalk, you had to get off the sidewalk. So he had experienced Atlanta and that level of racism and that level of Jim Crow. So he thought a dignified position, the civil rights that he was aiming for, would benefit all Black people. He gets booed and then goes to a diner and realizes there was no Jim Crow, no segregation. He was like, oh, they always could go in the restaurant and get a burger. The problem was they didn't have the money to buy a burger. That's what started him thinking economically. It was the LA visit that made MLK get a broader viewpoint. So I'm kind of just walking and massaging through that we have this romanticized version of how together our community was back then. It's not really much different now, but we will have to have strategy that is above and beyond fighting for things that we've already gotten. And that's what
can I
go ahead, Leo.
I love how you're talking about romance. Here's another thing that we're romantic about as a Black demographic that we need to challenge people about this romance. I want to point out to you that John Lewis, Andrew Young, Martin Luther King, Coretta Scott King, I could go on, and James Baldwin, they all came from Black schools in the South. Okay? The civil rights leadership, John Lewis, they came from Black schools set up from the legacy of Booker T. Washington. But what Black progressives and Democrats do now is they always go, we want to be in white schools and we want to be taught like white people. And so what I'm arguing, one of the reasons why that gap happened, where 1964 voting rights, pre-1964 civil rights leadership, they were taught how to fight against the structural problems in their schools. That when John Lewis was getting educated, they're getting educated on civic engagement, legal processes, rhetoric, and how to make an argument, debate. Black people ain't interested in that crap right now. I have a school that teaches critical thinking, debate, Frederick Douglass Roundtable, Atlanta and Classical. Black folks, the Atlanta public school system, I had an event at the school last week with the superintendent, but until now, they were very antagonistic towards our school. But those are the types of education that gives you the ability to fight the system. And so unless black people stop doing this white progressive liberal, love the education you're in, even though it's failing you, we need to say, we ain't going to support this education either unless it teaches us how to fight the system.
Very strong stuff. Let's play this clip.
You will get no argument from me, Leo. Real quick, Montoya. The thing that I think Leo's bringing out, that I think this brother was trying to bring out in his three-pronged sort of tactics, I don't think it's a strategy, is we're really going to have to think through what success economically looks like. We're going to have to think through what success politically looks like. We're going to have to think through, because to your point, Montoya, we achieved a level of success that was supposed to have been the foundation of the next level to achieve too. But we don't even know what that looks like today, because we've never really had, this is what Leo was saying, a political imagination that would inspire us to want to achieve that next level. That political imagination has been very systematically eroded, in my opinion, because of what Leo said. And this is where I think we got to be very emphatic. Black students in Black HBCUs and HBCUs learn from Black professors and people who were in the trenches over many decades how to think. We do not have a group of Black professors outside of the HBCUs who are teaching our Black students at MIT, Caltech, Harvard, Yale, and other PWIs how to think from that perspective. And this is what Leo's saying that I want to be very emphatic about. Until we have a political imagination that inspires us to want to adopt those understandings and those lessons, we will struggle with strategy over the next several decades. We're going to need a brand new political imagination to go forward.
Yep, and let me blow up the consistent strategy when these moments happen that I consistently see. You don't have to agree with me, but this is something that we also need to think about. So when we have these moments, those that get into the perspective of, well, let's just circle the wagon, let's just circle the wagons and not be a part of the system or just have our own. The game is out there to be played. There is no point in which history in which people have been secluded by choice or by geography in which they were able to advance with the rest of the world. You always lose. You always lose. The game is out there to be played, and we have to become more strategic. And I hope to a degree, politically conscious, we're inciting the idea to have some of that political imagination that Emil is talking about. I hate when I see people say, they took this from them. Like, you're in the same game. Play the damn game. Like there was, if $1 billion was, as Leo said, if $1 billion was done to strategically take it away, I can play the same damn game. I'm sorry, y'all. It is what it is. There are billionaires on liberal side who are pro. They just need to know what to do. And unfortunately, the Black civil rights leadership haven't told them what to do.
Yeah, and the Black billionaires haven't decided to be one of those liberal billionaires as a class. They have not made the choice that would allow what you're saying, Montoya, to be true and executed thoroughly. We need more than what we have represented at that level to be very clear. And I'll say this before you go to your next clip. A lot of us feel muzzled because we feel like our positions are very fragile. Leo, Montoya, Emil, we all can say what we say because we do not have someone breathing down our neck saying, if you say the wrong thing, you're fired. That's a fundamental thing that we are going to have to address as we build strategy, is there's a lot of very well-placed people who can't speak as freely as they might want to for fear that their fragile position may be eliminated or changed.
All right, let's play this clip. This is a solution that Shelley came up with, and I'm going to also share a quote that he put on his page for us to dialogue through this thing as well.
Well, you strategically change where you can your voter identification to independent strategically, or you change it to Republican strategically. You vote the same way you want to vote, but you change everything. If they're getting ready to draw out James Clyburn's district in South Carolina, every single African American in those districts that it's redrawn to should become Republicans on paper. Because there's no racial classification inside of your voter base. I know it's in Georgia, it's not. But you change your voter identification to Republican. And then what do? You put up white Democrats as Republicans in the new South Carolina district, and you run them as Republicans.
So that's an attempt at some type of strategy, but I want to put it up against this quote that Shelley put up prior to that show, and that was something Shelley said on our show last week. And at the time, it was right before he challenged you and me, Emil. Basically, he was like, "What are we going to do?" He's like, "I don't want to spend time on the history. It's happened. What are we going to do?" And that was an example of a strategy that Shelley threw out there on our show just last week. I want to say, however, and again, he said this way back on May 5th, so I'm trying to give people the proper context. But it just, I got some thoughts on it. And he says, when this stuff was first starting to brew and the Supreme Court made the decision, he goes, "How did the narratives spin out to they are taking our right to vote away? That is a stretch. No, it's a whole lie." So that's something that Shelley has consistently been saying, that he understood what you and I were saying to him last week about the issues with this act happening. But I've consistently watched him on his show kind of stand by that, that the Democrats per se are taking it too far to say they are taking our rights to vote away, because he's, in a sense, I think he simplifies it to the fact that, yes, you can still vote. I would challenge Shelley, if he were here today, that quote that he's saying, "No, it's a whole lie," that this is no different than what happened after the amendments happened in the late 1800s. And then you get a damn near 100-year, once the military leaves after Reconstruction, after the 12 years of Reconstruction, then you get the KKK backlash to actually get rid of and disenfranchise the vote by breaking the law. So I think the exact same thing. However, I don't know that you could just simplify that it's a whole lie to say they're taking your right to vote away if it's going to be enacted similarly to what the KKK did over 100 years ago. Obviously, we're not going to have people in hoods making sure you can't go vote and get tested again, but effectively the Voting Rights Act got put in place for the same reason that they've worked to take it away. So I don't know that it's a genuine thought to just simply say, "Oh, it's a whole lie," to say they're taking your vote away. Your thoughts, Emil, on what I'm saying?
So the challenge that I have in that language of saying it's a lie is you got to go back to the Southern strategy with Lee Atwater and how he framed the argument. You can't say the N-bomb anymore, so you say these words instead. That's all this is a reframing of the language in order to accommodate, I'm not wearing a hood, therefore I'm not in the KKK. I'm not saying the N-bomb, therefore I'm not a racist. Those are the ways that they camouflage these attacks. And I'm sorry, but that language has been usurped by people who obviously understand that they can't just be outright racist to the extent that they could be before the Civil Rights Act of 1964. They're not playing the game of I'm wearing a hood and burning a cross in your lawn, and therefore look at me, I'm a racist now. They're doing it much more subtly. And if we don't acknowledge that this attack is subtle, strategic, nuanced, then we run the risk of thinking, well, I can still vote, therefore I'm good, when in fact, what they are doing is systematically eroding it to the point where there's an old saying in the South, how do you cook a frog? You don't put it in a pot of boiling water, you put it in the water and then turn up the heat and it'll never jump out, right? That's kind of the illusion that I'm making here that I think is missed in that simplistic analysis. I think the Democrats are the sky is falling. They've been saying the sky is falling. Black people often say that too, because any attack feels like a nuclear attack to us. But at the same time, we know the playbook because it was exposed in 1971. We don't have, or 1981 when Lee Atwater had his big interview where he told us the game. So we can't sit here and act like this erosion, one drip, one step, one layer at a time, isn't intended to do just what we think it is. Otherwise, they wouldn't attack at all.
And here's what I would also say to Shelley if he were here, was the fact that you even came up with that strategy on the spot. You know, to his credit, he's a thinking man, so I'm not saying it's a good strategy or bad strategy, but even if you think it through, okay, well, we're going to switch to Republicans and run a Democrat through the Republicans. Like, I'm just talking about the fact that you got to jump through those hoops shows it's not a lie. You understand what I'm saying?
Shelley, I mean, God bless him. Shelley is just talking, man. And I want to give him the room to that this was a spontaneous sort of idea that he was thinking out loud. And I might have heard him say some stuff like that in the past, but I don't think he's really thought it through. And here's why. In Georgia, and people need to be aware of this because I know we have listeners from all over the country. In Georgia, there are in many cases what we're experiencing right now. For instance, we have elections happening in Georgia right now. The primary elections for governor, lieutenant, are all happening right now. Mm-hmm. If you walk in there and you are a Democrat, you're not getting a Republican ballot. He doesn't know that. And if you do, then say, switch me to a Republican ballot, because you're going to get the ballot that you know.
No. To be fair to Shelley, that's what he's saying. Just so to be fair to him, I do know that he's
right.
saying
So okay. Well, let me explain it out though. So he's saying that. Good. He's got that part. So you go in, you're a Democrat. You say, give me a Republican ballot. Right. So they'll give it to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Because
right. They have to. So they give you the Republican ballot. Now you see Republican names for the primary on the ballot. You vote there. Guess what? It is illegal for you then to vote. If there's a runoff, you have to continue to vote Republican.
Oh, wow. See, yet again, it's good. This is why we're having
You're caught. See, Charlie he's not looking at the intricacies of election law, right? And that's true in a lot of states. So in California, that would work, but that doesn't. California's jungle primary, open primary for there's no partisan primary, but you don't need that movement in California. So again, this is why you got to get the Mark Elias's of election defense law. You got to get the American Bar Association and the Protect Democracy Legal Defense Fund. You got to get these folks involved at the state by state level, because the one place where we have the ability to fight back is still local, because the Supreme Court has not said that we can overrule states. That's why Trump puts pressure on Alabama, Kay Ivey, governor, to say, do this, because he can't force the state. So that's your playbook, Bakari Sellers. That's your playbook. Go to Alabama, to the state, put pressure on the governor.
I am 100% in agreement. And this is the thing that I think from a political strategy moment, right? Like we're having that moment right now in this discussion. Every state has its own unique history and opportunity. So we're going to need to let the people in Tennessee, like Justin Jones and the guys and I know a lot of that's performative, but at the same time, they're calling attention to it. But we're going to need state by state strategies across, because there are opportunities in every state. For instance, if you're going to crack Memphis, then what you may have done in cracking Memphis is you may have just diluted your ability to do something else in Memphis that we should take advantage of. We don't know. I don't know what that is, but I know they know what it is. And so if they came to the rest of us and said, hey, this is where we think we can, they left an opening for us. Here's the opening we can exploit. That's something that we should then coordinate and work on. And we should be doing that state by state across all of these states that are doing this. For instance, are there vulnerable Supreme Court judges that you would vote in or out? That's one. If you need to, if it's an unpopular governor, is a recall like in Louisiana, is that going to be the tactic? There's a ton of ways we can leverage this moment. We should remember passionately the sacrifices of our elders.
Right. and
But we
their
should not
willingness
limit ourselves to that memory.
and the willingness of what they did to pull this off and what it actually looks like for real politically. It doesn't
Deep insight, brother.
It doesn't look like telling an athlete don't go to a school. At the end of the day, only about 25% of your population has the capacity and the ability to do the things that we're talking about. So when we say this is what we need to do, I'm being very sincere here. I'm not talking to all Black folks.
Thank you.
Yeah. The reality is, like in Atlanta, for as much as we call Atlanta the Black Mecca and all this type of thing, I never forget Jay Bailey, who started the Rice Center here, highlighted at this event. I never forgot this number ever in my life because it made me understand things. He said, "Hey, 73% of Atlantans are asset poor. Asset poor is different it's a different metric than what people are used to. And that asset poor is determined by with a $3,000 emergency." Ruin you completely because you don't have the finances in your bank or the asset. So if 73% of Atlantans are asset poor, he mentioned this at a political event in his point, and most people at the event missed it because the event was pushing voter engagement and understanding politics, but it was mostly about voter engagement. And he's basically was saying is y'all are talking as if that 73% has time to be in this room. He didn't say it directly, but that's what the hell he was saying. And so
that's the Du Bois piece that we need to get back to.
And that's why I'm bringing it out right now.
And so where people make the mistake, Emil, is that they counter Du Bois by saying, well, he's elitist and he's just talking about the talented, the intellectuals. Well, that's exactly what we need to do. We need to tell the people who brag about going to Howard, who brag about going to Spelman, then show me. You're the talented 10th. Let me see you do what Du Bois actually envisioned you doing. And that's what we're not doing. So when Stacey Abrams gets on national TV and she goes, if you know that racial discrimination has existed in maps, can you use race to fix that? Well, see, she even did that wrong. See, and that's it. She's a talented 10th, but somebody needs to check her because that's not even what the question is. The question is, do you know that racial discrimination existed in maps? The question is, does racial discrimination exist now? Not then. You see, she was a talented. So we gotta call out our Black intellectuals and say, you need to be what Du Bois envisioned. You need to be excellent and right. And let them and encourage that. Instead of playing to the bottom common denominator. Well, an HBCU education is equal to Harvard. Bull.
I would challenge, and I'm co-signing you, Leo, but I would challenge every Black elite to go to W.E.B. Du Bois' 1948 speech to the Boule, where he said, I messed up on the talented 10th. I didn't factor in. And I'll let you read that very brilliant speech. Just Google or search on W.B. Du Bois' speech to the Boule in 1948, and he articulates what you just said in a whole different language, and he breaks down where his theory of the talented 10th breaks down. Because if we don't understand what he saw near the end of his life, we miss the big lesson that he was trying to get us to see, which is not that the talented 10th is wrong, but that the training for the talented 10th has to accommodate some things about America that he did not know were true until later in his life. Those truths are being played out right now. And I challenge every Black elite to go read that speech before you understand, before you think you know what you know. That speech will teach you a little something different.
Yeah. And I mean, it's just, if we're talking about strategy on a politically conscious level, again, I'm saying this one more time for reiteration. The reiteration isn't, again, I would offer that D.L. Hughley and Ryan Clark spirit are in the right place. I would offer at least the way I don't know Ryan Clark personally, but I would say as a man, he's not as Leo said, hey, these are rich people saying this about poor kids. I would offer Ryan Clark as this kind of kid that right now, if he was living, he would be one of those ones that would refuse to go to one of those. I think that's who he is as a man. So I know he brought the thought forward with the correct intent. However, the bigger and higher challenge is that we are challenging the right people. And I'm not talking about right people because I'm judging you. I'm talking about the people that have the time and the capacity like our ancestors did for us. Anything that we have been awarded and rewarded from them is because the right ones had the time and took the time. Martin Luther King even said the struggle was always left to the dedicated few. That was his own word.
Ryan Clark went to LSU.
Absolutely.
So you're going to tell me, Ryan, that, New Orleans, I wouldn't live in New Orleans, not unless I was super rich. So you're going to tell me, you know what I'm saying? You saw all the people who try to leave New Orleans and come to Georgia, to Atlanta. So this dude went willingly to LSU. That's a very racist area.
Yeah, but like
and then he's going, after he gets his million, now he's going to tell the other black kids don't do the same thing.
Like I said, I'm not challenging his intent. I'm just talking the actual strategy itself. And I want to make sure that on this show that we're not, for all that are watching, we're not just simply say we should all come together. That's not a strategy. The strategy is if $1 billion was spent to come to this day, we got to figure out what we need to do to play the game that's available to be played. It's time for us to learn how to play the game. Go ahead, Leo.
But I want to be clear because I like to be structural and I like to be definitive about call to action.
Fair enough.
I am moved to revisit athletes in action, see what they're doing. I know there years ago when my daughter was a high recruit, she got some stuff from some LA brothers, Los Angeles brothers, who were talking about using black athletes' political power before any of this stuff. Okay. So the question I'm going to leave on the table again for Ryan Clark, D.L. Hughley, all the people who want to be like Harry Belafonte to Martin Luther King is the question is, will you be like Harry Belafonte to Martin Luther King? Because Harry Belafonte, when the mic was being placed in front of him, he walked away from it with his audience intact. They came to see him, DL, but then they gave the mic to someone who knew what the hell they were talking about, Martin Luther King. See, that's what the D.L. Hugleys aren't doing. They get an audience because they're entertainers, but then they don't hand the mic to an expert. So now I can sit here and criticize them, but as a talented 10th member, I now have the duty to say, how can I help them partner with me? So I'm going to be looking at ways, okay, is there a movement with an NIL collective that Ryan would say something like, if there is a poor kid who has the opportunity to play at Connecticut, for instance. Now, I'm not going to go HBCUs because I think that's harder. But even if it is, that's harder in the kids. But even in HBCU, I have a kid who wants to go play at FAMU. But Georgia is recruiting him. Can you then develop as an NIL collective, whatever Georgia offers him, do you guys have enough money to make it worth that kid's while? And can you continue to promote him so that he can get other opportunities? Because he is not going to get the TV exposure. He's going to lose on all that thing that can make him have a professional contract. So I'm not against what those guys are saying. I'm not against someone choosing an HBCU, but know what you're going to have to do to compensate for the difference.
Right, absolutely. And
we ought to be able to, I'm willing to work. I might not have millions to give, but I have strategy and connections to give.
No, I respect it. My brother Brent House says other black voices are also registering as Republicans. As an independent, I've been advocating for that for years. I'm not saying it in itself is the strategy, but I've been advocating because we have a very specific role as a black collective, and kind of always have. Historically, we've either mostly voted Republican outside of about 2 election cycles, and then all Democratic for the most part. That's who we've always been. So we've always been deciding factor in close elections. And because we've had that unique position, and even though we are the third demographic, we are still the second highest voting bloc. And so I've always thought it would be strategic, to Brant's point. I'm not saying he's making that point. He's just saying other people are saying this, that if we were independent, well, I'm going to be independent and actually work with who has power in the state whether it's Republicans or Democrats. I felt like that's the more strategic position for us as a voting bloc, even for those that don't, in a sense, have the capacity to do what we're talking about on this show. But even for that other 73%, your one vote, we've talked about this on the show, your one vote does matter more than you believe. And if you can do it in numbers, you can have effects. So with that said, Brent, I think that people that are advocating for that are beginning to think above and beyond the emotion of it all. And I don't know what the one solution is, and there probably won't be one solution. But I am glad that this time is forcing us, if we're saying that we have to do something about this, and if we're respectful of how strategic it was against us, then we have to learn to be as strategic. I've still, of the extra 15 minutes of y'all time, I would love to play one more clip, get y'all response, and then I'm gonna close out with a clip dedicated to Robert Small, the greatest black politician in the history of this country. So that's how we'll close the show. But I do want to get a response to kind of pretty much a lot of what I've been saying, and this was on my show last week that I said, this is a very short clip, but I said this on the Mental Dialogue Perspective last Saturday. I just want to close out again why I attacked the comment that if they could take it away when you've never had the power, what you're missing is our ancestors, the way our democracy works. I just highlighted how the KKK started to really, their first purpose was to take away our vote. They were successful at, completely successful at it. But here it is. Our ancestors who understood how this democracy worked, they actually put people in land when they could, and they get disenfranchised. Then the civil rights group comes along and actually get the votes, get the coalition, because at 13%, we couldn't get the Voting Rights Act passed ourselves. They made the right coalitions to get the votes they needed, which means in our democracy, it ain't simply that it was taken away and you have no power. No, they used their power to get it put in place. So when you say if it can be taken away, you never had no power, it completely disregards the power of what the coalition and our ancestors actually did. You're dissing them. You're dissing our ancestors who actually understood the political process, made the coalitions necessary to have it be what it was. The Voting Rights Act served as a guardrail to those who never wanted us to have any representation. Right. If you think representation itself is not power, then go back to what I originally said, why the KKK wanted to ride, because we were getting too uppity and putting people in the power and controlling our own areas. They wanted to take that away. Leo, any thoughts to that comment?
No, I think you're absolutely right. And that's, again, we've been making assumed coalitions rather than making structural coalitions that have metrics and deliverables that we expect from a coalition. So when I am trying to work on a coalition for whatever I'm working on, I have deliverables that I expect from them. What the weak leadership on these issues on the progressive side have done is they just assume, just like Bakari again, he's making an assumption that everybody's sympathetic without actually requiring them to show behaviors. Right. So he loves Jen Psaki. I know he does because I've seen them hanging out together. Okay. But he doesn't say to Jen Psaki, hey, I need you to do this, 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 and this to show me. And that's real coalition building, as opposed to performative, emotional coalition building, saying, all these working family parties, they're all with us. Well, if you're not asking them to do something very specific, money, time, effort, then that's not a real coalition. And that's what our forefathers for the civil rights movements and foremothers used to do. They used to require, they used to go, Mr. Man, this is what we need.
Ella Baker was the queen of that. Ella Baker was the queen of that.
Louis Armstrong did it. Louis Armstrong did it. Martin Sr. did it.
Show and prove.
Mill, your thoughts, and I'm gonna close out with, again, the greatest black politician in the history of this country, Robert Small. Give me a thought, and then I'm gonna close out with that clip.
There's a growing cynicism in America that we're going to have to combat, even though we've had record turnouts in the last two presidential elections. I've said on this show and to you, Montoya, personally, that a very small block in between those giant presidential elections can control local and state politics. It's time for people to recognize what power really looks like. If 10% of the people who stayed at home in 2024 voted, the outcome would have been different. Had 10% of the people who stayed at home in 2016 voted, the outcome would have been different. We talk about how 89 million voters didn't vote in the last election. That's 100% true. What's not happening is the conversations we're having today, especially as in these times, is not making those voters want to come to the polls. We're going to need to fundamentally address two prongs in the strategy. One, make sure we know how to protect and advance our interests. And two, how to bring some of those disaffected voters into the camp so that they can exercise their power with us. Because if you don't do those two things, I don't know that you can guarantee the kind of success that we've seen happen against us in our defense and advancement.
And then the last part I'll say for something that adds to the apathy is the power of the vote has gotten us things that have been so standard that we actually think we don't get anything. And so Shelley correctly highlighted last week how we were having a dialogue about Killer Mike, how he was saying that Killer Mike, in a sense, for whatever issues you may have with him based on how he's moved in the last year or so, Shelley highlighted, well, he speaks for those people who feel like they've gotten nothing. And he said, and Shelley, correctly said, whether they're right or wrong about that, that is how they feel. And of course, that's how they see the political things. And so, I'll highlight, people are dismissive, but the reason you get overtime is because of politics. The reason
work week.
Yeah,
no
I'm just saying it's these things that are just kind of standard that you think come to you. You know what I mean? I got a brother who watches our show who I know is in the railroad union. It's one of the best in the whole country. All the benefits that you are guaranteed and know you're going to be okay with being in that union comes from politics. Like there's things that when you say, what have we gotten? You've been getting them for so long.
You think that they're nothing, yes.
That you're unaware of it. And now that somebody has strategically taken something away, we're like, oh, no, what's happening? No, you've been getting it because of a certain vote that you ain't thought about. And so we'd be like, well, what did they get us? No, you get a whole lot based on governing yourself. And when I say a whole lot, like I saw somebody mistakenly talk about like how the Asians, for example, what their median wealth is and how they value vote. And I'm just kind of like, median wealth don't go to what you get basics from politics. You have paved roads because of politics. They're not gonna make sure you're worth something individually. You know what I'm saying? But you have a paved road. If you have a paved road,
you get a functioning civil rights office. That's what you get
from politics.
Right? You get. There's so many things that we don't know we get because until they're gone, and then when they're gone, I'll say this: our ancestors were brilliant because it took 60 years to undo the Voting Rights Act. That's 60 years of them trying to do this work. That means our people did something right. So don't sleep on the fact that it took 60 years. That's a lot of, as they say in the neighborhood, that's a lot of rent-free living in somebody's head.
Absolutely.
But now we need to do more than that.
All right.
So
All right, before you say that.
Okay, go ahead, Leo.
That's right. And I mean, as y'all were talking, and as you shared what you shared, I could not think about Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes, right? Wake up, everybody! No more sleeping in bed.
Absolutely.
No more backwards thinking. No more. It's time for thinking ahead, right?
Absolutely.
And so, 1975, he wrote that song.
Yep.
And here it is now. That song's still
right. This is a great way to end this
The baddest black politician to ever walk America's soil was Robert Smalls. And let me tell you something. If Donald Trump hated Barack Obama, he would have absolutely lost his mind over Robert Smalls. Because Obama proved black excellence could be presidential. Robert Smalls proved it could be unstoppable, strategic, and humiliating to fragile men in power. Robert Smalls was born April 5, 1839, in Beaufort, South Carolina. Born enslaved, meaning America decided his limits before he ever spoke. But his mother, Lydia Polite, sent him to Charleston so he could study the system up close. Not to fear it, to beat it. Robert worked docks and boats, anything near water. While white folks underestimated him, he studied routes, signals, tides, and how power moves when it thinks it's untouchable. By 12, he out-earned white workers. By 15, he steered ships. By 18, he could sail anything. By 22, married with kids and still enslaved. Then came May 13th, 1862. While the Confederate crew of the warship, the Planter, went out drinking and talking that heritage nonsense, the original MAGA meet-up, Robert Smalls put on the captain's coat, gathered his all-black crew, picked up their families and sailed straight into history. He passed 5 Confederate checkpoints. 5. Every single one waved him through. Once in open water, he flipped the flag and handed the Union a fully armed warship, weapons and intelligence. No lying, no lawsuits, no claiming it was stolen, just execution. Lincoln saw that and recognized real leadership. Robert Smalls went on 17 missions, helped recruit thousands of black soldiers, then came home and bought the plantation he was once enslaved on. He moved his mother into the front parlor and let the former enslaver's widow stay. That's power without insecurity, something modern politicians keep cosplaying. Then Smalls ran for office. State House, State Senate, 5 terms in Congress. He built public education, fought segregation, protected black voting rights, and wrote laws in a country that once said he wasn't fully human. No tantrums, no indictments, no blaming judges. Just results. Born enslaved, stole a warship, freed his family, helped win a war, bought the plantation, wrote the laws. That's why.
So we wouldn't need a Black Panther movie if we ever got a Robert Smalls movie. Black Panther's fiction. Robert Smalls is true. If you're tired of the propaganda, listen to us. Thank y'all for the extra time today, fellas.
Peace.